Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Back-to-school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel. Hi, you're listening to episode 23 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Ash.
And I'm Tilly.
And today, we're not really doing an actual quest, so to speak, but more of a side quest.
Ooh, I love a good side quest. Tell me more.
Well, our client this time is actually a student from Lothlorien University.
Ooh.
I'll keep her anonymous so that she doesn't face any backlash in case any of her more problematic professors are listening to this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But she is currently working on a large research project looking at the gender dynamics of heroism and is getting quite frustrated because all these texts that she has access to are constantly using the same phrase to refer to women in these tales.
Let me guess. Damsel in distress?
You got it in one. So she's asked if we could look at our archive and help to find evidence that not all women in tales of heroism should be delegated as a damsel in distress.
Huh, that sounds like an excellent side quest.
Right? But before we check the archives, what's your experience of this stereotype in the fantasy fiction that you've read, Tilly?
Oh, well, I mean, actually, I think because I read a lot of more modern fantasy fiction, I guess it's not quite so prevalent anymore. Oh, although probably if I have to think, I was just trying to think, I was like, damsel, maybe like princesses and stuff. I was like, The Princess Bride.
Oh yeah, that's a brilliant one.
Is my favourite. And that is kind of the archetypal damsel in distress because poor Wesley just has to go through everything to try to rescue Buttercup, who's just like brushing her hair and going, oh no. But I almost feel like that's almost a bit of a parody of the damsel in distress though, if anything.
It is.
Like it's, But yeah, so I guess that's probably my favourite one. But I don't actually know that many. What about you? Do you know any ones?
I don't really either. Like, I mean, there definitely are them. I mean, there's a lot of like romanticies out there, but they sort of now, especially in the last like 20 years of books, like they tend to have changed the dynamic or flipped it on its head. One of my favourite books is by Megan Spooner and it's Sherwood and it's Maid Marian because she's the damsel in distress, isn't she?
Yeah.
But she's actually Robin Hood. And I quite like those ones where they flip it. And then you're like, and she does it out of like grief and sadness because Robin dies and he never becomes Robin Hood, but she becomes Robin of the Hood. So it's kind of, interesting that way. And she fights and everything goes wrong. It's a brilliant book. I definitely recommend it. I think I read it nearly twice a year or something.
What's it called?
Sherwood.
Oh,
the forest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Haven't heard of that one. It sounds good though.
Good
I must admit though, just when you were mentioning Robin Hood, I just remember one of my, even though there's a lot of issues with it, but one of my favourite films is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. With,
Prince of Thieves is
and Alan
your heart
Rickman.
out with a spoon.
Oh my God, he's just such a good show. Sheriff of Nottingham.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
I must admit, that's also the very, it's got like Robin Hood sweeping in at the end to, rescue Maid Marian. Oh, sorry, spoiler. I mean,
it's a centuries old tale.
I was about to say, it's been out for a while. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. And I mean, it's one of those ones that you kind of know what's going to happen at the end. But that sort of sweeping hero coming in and rescue, I must admit, even though, the feminist part of me is like, no, we don't need, heroes to come in and save us all the time. I do quite love the sort of fighting for someone, and kind of having that goal, if that makes sense, like that sort of.
It's a very romantic gesture.
Yeah, exactly. But then indeed, I don't necessarily need it to be the woman who's being saved all the time. There's also a lot of good examples out there of it's, the woman comes to save the man, or, all of that kind of thing.
Well, whenever I think of damsel in distress, I actually think of was it like 1994 Hercules, the Disney one, right? Because Megara in it, obviously she's the classic. In the myths, she doesn't end up very well. But like Meg is like the classic. She says, I'm a damsel, I'm in distress, but I can handle it.
I can handle it, yes. Yes, I love that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I was thinking about what would be the sort of earliest, actually, if we look at the history of damsels in distress. Because I guess, ancient Greek mythology, that's a lot of damsels in distress, like
terrible distress, horrible distress, like more than distress. I mean, absolute danger, probably from Zeus, but like like Andromeda
changed to the sea beast, and then Perseus comes and rescues her, and all of this kind of thing. Which I think, if I remember correctly, I think that there are the earliest depiction of the myth is like 1st century BC. So if that's the first like depiction of it, then it was probably around for a lot longer before that. So yeah, that's sort of quite an old one. But I do actually have a fun fact about damsels in distress. Do you know when the first reference to the phrase "a damsel in distress" came from? What would be your guess of like rough year?
Like medievally, like I don't know, late medieval. Maybe we're talking like 12th century or something like that.
Well, you do have a lot of like in the chivalric code and everything, you know, there's a lot of reference to that, but the actual phrase damsel in distress, apparently, and this is just based on my brief Google search, apparently it is from 1692. So yeah, and it's a poem written by Robin Ames, which is called, and I have to say this because the title is incredible, Sylvia's Complaint of Her Sex's Unhappiness, a poem being the second part of Sylvia's Revenge, or a satire against man. Which I think it's just rolls off the tongue.
I just love those long titles.
And I've actually found a Google Books version of it where you can read it. So I'll put the link in the show notes. When I was looking through it, trying to find the reference to a damsel in distress, it's on page 12, if anyone's interested. And it is quite funny. It's basically just her being like, oh, for God's sake, women are just supposed to do this and put up with this and all of that. And then we're just damsels in distress and all this kind of thing. And she's like tied, I think she is tied to a rock or something at the beginning anyway. And some man is like reading a book and hears a cry and it's like, oh, what is that? And
what's going on there?
Yeah, but I just thought that was a really funny title.
It is a hilarious title, but also the fact that it's written by a man.
Right? Although, I don't know, actually. I didn't look up Robert Ames properly. I might just quickly look up because I wonder if it's, maybe it's a pseudonym.
Oh my God, I love a pseudonym.
Robert Ames, poet, 1692. Let's just see. No, that's someone else. Okay, I can't find... I don't know. It's just apparently there's a concert a conductor called Robert Ames, and there's
I've just seen that
an officer of the American thing, and okay, never mind. Yeah, and he was in like late 1900s. So I can't find any easy information about him. But so maybe it's not a him. Maybe it's her. Maybe it's Roberta Ames, but she just wrote under a male pseudonym.
Perhaps.
Never know.
I mean, makes sense.
Right? You would.
Like absolute raging, like I'm sorry. Oh, God. Please cut out my swear words. So your ancient Greek mythology is a thing, and then what would be the kind of progression of that in terms of fantasy? I guess fairy tales probably, because if you think about it, well, Maid Marian is sort of a fairy tale myth. True. But then you've got all of them. Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty. But the original Grimm, even before then, the Grimm fairy tales and stuff, they are not as sweet.
True, but they're still in distress.
They're still in distress, and then are more in distress after the fact.
When the princes come to help, and they just make things worse. They just most of the time.
Everything worse, but not really from a woman's perspective. From a man's perspective, it's great. Well, at least 18th century man's perspective is great. And but Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, they all have to go through terrible hardships and furthermore hardships when they get married. So, I mean, it's quite telling.
Yeah. And then I was trying to think because you do have a lot of, I was actually watching, have you seen or read Northanger Abbey?
Of course.
Yeah. I was rewatching the version with, oh gosh, I can't remember her name. Oh my goodness, what's her name? She's
Felicity.
really famous. Yes, that's the one. Felicity.
Yes, I can't remember her last name.
Can't remember her last name, but that one. And it's so good. And I love the drama of it and the angst and all that.
Well, it's gothic.
It's so gothic. And I love, I was looking up the book in it, Tales of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe.
Oh yeah, that's
it's not fantasy sort of, although I think there's some like magic in it. But I started reading it actually. I downloaded the Kindle book, and it's very like starts off straight away, damsel in distress, front and center, like very much, very damsel-y, very in distress, like quite intense.
Oh yes, very much. It's like it's well, Northanger Abbey. If we go back to that one, that's Jane Austen having a go at the the Gothic writers. She's like, oh, this is so silly. But there's a whole theme of them. So there's the Tales of Udolpho, but there's like the monk.
Yes,
as well.
True. Yeah.
Which is all about a woman's virtue and like this monk is overcome by it, so scandalous. And then it develops into like, it's about consent. I think that's the thing. The issue of consent comes up because of the damsel in distress, but it never gets like really thought about or talked about a lot in the kind of Gothic literature, which eventually turns into your sort of fairy tale, well, even beforehand, your fairy tales, and then your sort of fantasy stuff. It sort of permeates through. And then you finally get people going like, maybe she didn't want this lust. Maybe she was just having a bad day and she just needed a bit of a help and nobody helped her in the way. And then we're like, oh, actually, she's so beautiful. She must be mine. Yeah. Like, no.
And I've helped her now, so I deserve to have her. And you're like,
I deserve it. I've won her.
Works.
Yeah. And it's some sort of corruption of chivalry and all that. Yeah. So it doesn't really work until then you get, feminism and the wave of feminism.
Exactly.
And then eventually we can unravel it.
And I mean, you can definitely see that in the progression of fantasy fiction as well, right? Like when sort of feminist kind of morals start to become a little bit more permeated through society and people start to realize, maybe we shouldn't just delegate women as damsels in distress. Then you start to see that in fantasy fiction as well in terms of kind of how people are represented.
Yeah, there's like you can like I think is it T. Kingfisher, they do very well like Sword Heart, because you have like the female she the female main character, she's sort of saved by the man, but she's very much does not need a man or is not weak because of it and is not relegated to a secondary character or anything like that. And you do get that eventually carrying on where you get these kind of, and it's almost redundant now, the badass female character,
right? That's almost
because
gone.
Now we've sort of moved on from that as well.
It's like a stereotype as well. You're like, cool, she's badass, she knows what she wants, and living on the edges and the fringes of society, not like other girls.
She's not like anyone else. She's such a pick me. And then and then now we kind of go, actually maybe we can just be like people and normal and not have to have anything different or cool about us. Which is
treated like equals.
Yes, exactly. Maybe we could just be like a man. And I think as well sometimes older fantasy fiction, when you read it and it's especially written by a man, the certain assets that are focused on in a woman, certain things when you're describing them, you're like, oh god, or certain tropes like using sex as a plot device, even worse as a plot device, and it just does not work at all. And it actually it creates that damsel in distress trope, and it just continues on and continues on and continues on, and it's not helpful.
No. Which, so you know who I'm going to talk about, right? But there is a really interesting sort of long essay, short book that was brought out called The Women of Pratchett, where they talk about this, and they talk about how you can really see, because he was writing them for so long, because it's such a long series, the Discworld series. By the way, for those who are just listening in, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go and listen to the back catalogue.
I feel like you don't have to really say that every
you clearly have no idea what's going on. But yeah, so and you can, because he was writing them in like the 70s, 80s at the start, and that's still, I mean, the whole feminist movement was only really just kind of getting going at that point, really. So it hadn't sort of perpetuated as much. And you can see, like, in his first ones, I mean, on the one hand, it's almost a bit of a satire of it. Like, it's sort of a bit of a, oh yeah, this is the stereotype of the very buxom, wench barbarian or whatever. But then in the later ones, it's definitely a lot more subtle and a lot more nuanced. And you have these females in power who aren't necessarily sexual or, anything like that. Like, it's sort of, you can see it develop even within that one series, which is quite interesting.
You find it in, I think, from definitely from the 70s, but into the 90s, you find even to the early 2000s with fantasy books. Like, for instance, we are currently reading, or have been reading, Timeline in our Archaeo book club that we also run. And you find that if to be a strong woman, you also have to be super attractive to a man, which is very confusing. And then if you're a damsel in distress, you also have to be super attractive, but you have to be extremely innocent. For, like, we were talking about ancient Greek mythology. Technically, Helen of Troy she's rescued and she's unhappy, but if she wasn't beautiful, she wouldn't be a damsel in distress.
Yeah, true.
She would be a licentious, horrible woman. Oh yeah, But she has a good virtue, and she's very beautiful in that way. And she's rescued from an unhappy marriage. Yeah, which admittedly does sound really quite terrible for her.
I mean,
but,
but
also
still.
Then being stuck with Paris sounds even worse.
I mean, I can just see her trying to weigh up the options. Like, oh God,
yeah, what do I do? Like, oh no, But then that's the thing. It still has to be. You still have to be attractive and know it to be strong,
but not know it too much.
Not to know it too much.
Not be too aware of your own.
Oh my God,
wonderfulness.
No.
Like, because you have to still be modest.
No, because then you're the villain.
Yes. Right? Then you're too,
So, yeah. Okay, so why don't we get started on this side quest then? Because I think we know quite a bit.
Sounds good. So I'll go and start searching through the Western archives.
Okay, great. And I'll go to the East, and then we'll meet back here and convene.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Okay, here's what I found.
And here's my stuff.
Okay, so what kinds of proof can we offer from an archaeological standpoint that would help our students, do you think?
Well, I think the place to start would probably to look at studies in gender archaeology.
Gender archaeology. What is that?
Oh, well, I'm so glad you asked me that. We're such good actors.
I agree.
So gender archaeology, kind of very, 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 very simplified definition, is studying the past through an investigation of the social construction of gender identities and relations. And this might sound odd, but actually it's kind of essential, because even though gender might be something that we consider like a social construct, and everyone, is with all the, political correctness gone wild that everyone's complaining about and everything with gender and identity at the moment, but still it's a big part of how people identify themselves and of how people create relationships with each other. So, I mean, I would say it's pretty important.
It's essential.
Respect. Yeah, it's a pretty essential part. And again, it only really emerged in the kind of 1970s, within sort of as a kind of official concept of archaeology. But yeah, the kind of keystone publication, as it were, was from 1984, and it was entitled quite simply Archaeology and the Study of Gender by Margaret Conkey and Janet Spector. And that's been kind of referred to a lot. I mean, especially Conkey, I think I assume you say Conkey. Sorry, it sounds odd to say, but I assume that's her name. I think that's pretty much the kind of Bible of that people always refer back to and kind of look at the starting point of that one, which unfortunately is not open access, but I will put the link in the notes anyway, in case anyone can get institutional access or something like that. But yeah, so indeed, only came really in the sort of 1970s, of course, triggered a lot by the feminist movement kind of the 1960s. But I have a bit of a question for you, Ash. Would you say feminist archaeology is the same as gender archaeology?
I think they're tied, definitely. I feel like one rolled into another historically. But I suppose to fight for anything, personally, as a feminist, to fight for anything that enables equality, expression, of a person herself is inherently, for me, feminist. So, yes, but no.
Well, half of the gender archaeological community would violently disagree with you on that.
But that was a very loaded question, Tilly.
Of course it was. It's leading you by the nose. Into the pit. But yeah, because I went down a complete rabbit hole when I was reading up for this episode. I mean, there's just so much to read, and I'm going to already say to people listening in, there's no way that we can cover all of the nuances and all of the detail of this field of archaeology. So if this is something that interests you, please do go and do some further reading. I've put a couple of links in the show notes so to get you started, and then you can sort of move on from there. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap between them, of course, but there's a lot of debates, and mainly this is referring to the actual terminology used, because feminist is such a loaded term that I think a lot of,
yes.
Right? Which is ridiculous, because all it means is that you believe in equality. So every time I always had friends...
And
yeah. And every time I had friends who were like, oh, but I'm not a feminist, I'd be like, really? So you don't believe in equality between like
sexes or the gender, anyone, people?
Okay, because that's all that feminism means, really. It's just, unfortunately, as with everything, there are, of course, those who take it almost too far one way, and they're not interested in equality. They're interested in one or the other.
Which I think is a very rare percentage of it. I think it is a very loaded term in our modern politics, especially right-wing politics, I think. But then, I mean, it's just a term to reflect equality and to bring people to the same level. Not bring anyone down, bring people up.
Yeah.
But then people say that's humanist, don't they? So
right, yeah, exactly. And I think this is the main issue. I think that at the end of the day, everyone believes this, who is involved in these different spheres of this kind of overall topic do have the same beliefs in terms of, their morals and their ethics and that kind of thing of what they believe is right. But it's just, the terminology that's used is something that people get a bit caught up on.
And what is academics if not the argument of terminology, honestly?
If we can't spend a whole afternoon arguing over the meaning of the word assemblage, what are we?
Exactly.
I mean, gosh, that's still going on, that debate about what is an assemblage? And it's like, can't we just use the dictionary definition? That's some point.
No, because that's not the definition, Tilly.
I know. But, and it's all these, I mean, that was also, I have to say, for my research when I was doing the Paleo-Inuit research, and then there's been so many changes in the definitions used because, of course, the term Eskimo is actually quite offensive to Inuit populations, and it was historically used, and now Inuit is used. But then it was Paleo-Eskimo was always used, so then they changed that to Paleo-Inuit, but then some people were like, well, no, because it's not actually Paleo-Inuit because they're not genetically linked to modern Inuit. So then other people said, okay, well, let's change it to and then you have like 1,000 different definitions and no one can agree on like which ones can be used, and some of them
no, and I suppose it needs to be, and I don't know about that, your studies, but it needs to be the people that are actually affected by these categories, that need to make that decision, not the white academics,
the Southerners.
Yes,
no, exactly. And so that's a whole other thing as well as to whether you use the phrase Dorset or Tunit. But then, anyway, I won't get into that. That's a whole other episode.
Which we definitely could do. That would be very fun.
Yeah, we should totally do that one. There's a lot of fantasy fiction set in northern frozen waste, climates, so we can have a look and see how actual ethnographic evidence of frozen climates would be. But yeah, so I mean, I guess the difference between kind of feminist archaeology and gender archaeology, if we're really being pedantic about definition, is that gender archaeology focuses on making certain social dynamics that have been ignored visible and reinterprets previous assumptions based on our kind of new understanding of those social dynamics, specifically in terms of gender. Whereas feminist archaeology is more actively kind of going for the reassessment and the reinterpretation. I think that was, and again, this is probably going to be the episode where we get lots of people suddenly messaging us and emailing us and being like, what are you talking about? Again, as I said, there's a lot of nuance in this, but this was what I got from it as the kind of option, because there's a lot of very little differences between them, and there's a lot of discussion over exactly how this approach should be kind of undertaken.
Absolutely. And just to like caveat we have reached out to numerous gender archaeology specialists for this episode. Yeah. However, it did not pan out. No. So we are doing it. Yes. And therefore you've got
hopefully we will have someone who actually knows what they're talking about coming in and talking about this. We just wanted to provide a little bit of a overview.
More on the subject. Yes, definitely.
Because this is
it's so broad.
I think when we started doing this, we were like, let's just do Damsels in Distress. Yeah, that'd be fun. And then we were like, oh my gosh, what have we gotten into?
It's too big. And unfortunately, both Tilly and I are one of those people that we get lost in research. And therefore, either you were going to get this episode or you would not get an episode because we would be so deep into books. we would be lost.
A 10-part special.
We were considering time. We could just do like a read-along of a... No, don't do that. No, it's not.
Because indeed, there is a fantastic book, which indeed I had added to our notes to be like, maybe we can pick some examples from this book, but we're not going to have time because there's so many things we can talk about. There's this book called Gender Stereotypes in Archaeology, which was published by Sidestone Press. It is free to read on the Sidestone Press website. I'll put the link of that as well in the show notes. And this is just a really nice... It provides some really nice examples of why it is important to use a gender archaeology approach to the study of the past. Because I think maybe a lot of people listening in as well might also be like, ugh, why do we have to make it so complicated? Like, why do you have to add gender, into the discussion? Why can't you just look at the past?
Because it's important.
Exactly. and I guess the problem is it's that whole thing of, because it wasn't done in the past at all, like in the past of archaeology. Like it wasn't...
Yes,
considered.
It wasn't done in our discipline at all. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So what's great about gender archaeology is it breaks down these almost Victorian thoughts of how family and people should be kind of categorized. So like the nuclear family, that women were simply gatherers and not hunters, or how women were only looking after children, how they are goddesses.
How men were the only ones who were violent.
Yeah.
How they went to war and
And also looking at LGBTQ plus people of the past. And, you know, as someone that's a part of that community, I think it's so important to look at and go back and see and think actually the way that we look at gender and gender roles is completely different to how people in the past do. And that's what archaeologists are very good at. We're good at separating our modern society from the past. We are trained to do that from the beginnings of your first lecture, you know?
Yeah.
We are trained to think, well, no, it could be something completely different and interpret that way. However, people in the past in our discipline didn't do that and just assumed that the people that were buried in these large warrior-laden material culture graves were men. But actually, now with DNA studies, we're seeing that that's not true. And therefore, it changes the way that we see a culture, a people, and a movement. And so, it's very much needed. And I think right now, are needed desperately.
Well, and also, I was just flicking through the gender stereotypes book and I came across a chapter where the title is, "There is no longer a need for dedicated gender archaeology." That is the stereotype that they're then trying to argue against. Yeah, and they make the good point that, okay, maybe you could go the other direction and you could be like, okay, we don't actually need gender archaeology anymore because we're all, you know, woke and we all understand that it's part of the, you know, what we're looking at. So it's just automatically incorporated. We don't need a gender archaeology. We just need archaeology because that already incorporates gender. But they make the good point that like, no, it doesn't. Like a lot of the time it still doesn't. And, you know, there's also a lot of mix up between sex and gender in terms of like biological sex and kind of the social construct of gender. And even though you have like all of these really great sort of developments in scientific analysis and everything, so we can, like you were saying, you know, we can look at like, it was actually a female chieftain, not a male chieftain, or, you know, all of these kind of things. But looking at the social constructs that surround that is still something that like hasn't been developed as much, and that needs to be developed a lot more. But also their final point, which I think is the most important one, is that, and I'm going to quote them on this, archaeology is the study of the past in the present, which, you know, like it's so, and they say, therefore, our research is inextricably linked to current discourses. Abandoning gender topics in the past would also mean less awareness of gender problems in the present, which I think is a really good point because, the whole point of looking at the past, of archaeological interpretation, is to better understand how we got to where we are today and better understand what we're doing today. If we have to look at the past with as much detail and with as much kind of awareness as if we would look at the present.
Yeah, totally, exactly. And I mean, that even relates to us as a field, as an actual career as well, you know? Yes. And how we can, I sometimes think we could use some of the lessons in the past to the present and try and make things a safer environment for everyone. Yeah. I mean, harassment, you know, assault, bullying, everything, it's still prevalent in archaeological discourse, in academia and in a kind of commercial context too. And it's something that we need to break down, and gender archaeology helps us do that. Yes. Exactly. It would be great that one day we just automatically have this in our discipline. Yeah. It'd be amazing.
The norm.
But almost we have to label it in order to bring attention to it. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, the same has been done, as we said in section 1, in fantasy fiction. That's already kind of been addressed a lot in terms of like, oh, look, we shouldn't just have, you know, these things. And there's not just heterosexual relationships in fantasy. And, you know, there's so much difference. I mean, gosh, Ash's reading definitely isn't gender normative, heterosexual human relationships all the time.
So just help me right now, Tilly. My God,
it's fantasy. It's a big part of fantasy.
It doesn't matter if a Minotaur falls in love with a man. It doesn't matter. Okay,
exactly. It doesn't matter. But that's what I'm saying. God. I'm saying, you know, that has changed. That has changed a lot, and so, you know, if it can happen in fantasy fiction, then it should be able to happen in archaeology as well. Not
Minotaur
that I'm saying we need to look at Minotaur relationships. So I think we can definitely have a look through these scrolls from the perspective of gender archaeology, and maybe, you know, reinterpret, reassess some of those stories which incorporate a damsel in distress. And then maybe we can give the student some examples and she can continue to apply that approach of kind of the gender perspective in her further reading.
Yes, sounds good to me. I'm going to send her this Gender Stereotypes in Archaeology book.
Yes, it's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Well, that's about it for this episode of And My Trowel. We hope you enjoyed this sort of quest. If you have any suggestions on topics for future episodes, do get in contact via email or social media. All contact info, as well as references and further reading, and for all the points we've discussed today, can be found in the show notes. Also, don't forget to check out other shows, okay, on the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you'd like to support us or our fellow podcast hosts on the network, you can always become a member. All information can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
I should also, though, I also want to quickly add, if you're interested in the kind of topics that were explored today, we did a live Culturo Share event a while ago, which focused on motherhood in archaeology. And quite a few of the kind of concepts that we've touched on today were discussed by people who do actually know what they're talking about. So if you're a member, you can listen and watch that for free on the website as well. Oh, what was that?
What?
I don't know. I feel like something just brushed my face.
Oh, maybe it's that shower of dust that's currently floating around the room.
But where? What? Oh, wait. I remember now. Ha! Well, this next quest is going to be...
What? What is it?
Magical.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.